Okay, wanted to take a look at a couple questions that you guys had on the assignment that is due tonight. Your top two questions were number 10 and number 11. And you guys were introduced yesterday from Mrs. Pinion about the law of cosines. Okay, I think formerly we had talked about the law of sines, and in that, Mrs. Pinion had referenced looking for what was called a strong ratio. Okay, and a strong ratio is anytime you know an angle and then you also would happen to know the side opposite that. Okay, but you find yourself in situations like number 10 and like number 11 where there is no strong ratio initially in the picture. Okay, by the way, just to make sure we're clear on this, when the directions say to solve the triangle, that means they are wanting you to find all of the missing sides and all of the missing angles. And as you show the supporting work for how you're doing that, please add those pieces of information back onto the picture. Okay, pictures need to be drawn for all of these. Okay, so you can see in number 10, here's the picture that we're given. And as you, because I think that we all would probably agree that the law of sines feels easier to use than the law of cosines. So if you can use the law of sines, you would definitely want to do that. Okay. As you look at number 10, though, you'll notice the only angle we know is the 92-degree angle, and we don't know the side opposite that. So we don't actually have that strong ratio that we need in order to do the law of sines. Okay, and so this is where we're going to use the law of cosines. By the way, the law of cosines is generally, you're forced to use that in a situation where you are given two sides and the angle included in between those two sides, or as we'll see in number 11, when you're given all three sides and none of the angles. That's another situation where you don't have that strong ratio and you're forced to do the law of cosines. One thing that I just want to draw your attention to with the law of cosines, I'm sure Mrs. Pinion had touched on this in her video, and and there's three different ways you can write this, but here's the part that I want you to make sure that you're seeing. All the way over here on the right-hand side is an angle, okay? The way I wrote this formula here, I have cosine of angle A on the right side. I want you to see what I have all the way over here on the left side. See how I have side A squared on the left side. Okay, that's a pattern that you'll see in the formula for law of cosines. So what's filled in the middle then is the other two sides squared. Notice there's addition in between those, and then minus 2, and then those same two sides, except they're not squared, so B and C are being multiplied in front of cosine angle A. Okay. And the other thing I think that Mrs. Pinion also stressed was when you are doing the law of cosines, you always need to make sure that you are starting out finding the largest side or angle first. Okay, so let's go ahead and see here if we can find side B would have to be the place that we'd have to start anyhow. So the only angle we know on this is angle B is 92 degrees. Okay, so if I'm going to use this law of cosines, okay, I'm going to plug in, there's only one place to plug an angle in. You notice all these are lowercase letters, so all those are side lengths, except all the way at the end here where I have written cosine A, I'm going to use cosine angle B, and I know that angle is 92 degrees, so I'm going to fill that in here. Now, the moment I'm using angle B here, all the way over here on the left-hand side of the formula, I have to put side B squared. See how over here I had angle A, and then all the way over here would be side A squared. So I'm just going to put a lowercase b squared. That's the side I'm solving for right now. I don't know that side, so I'm solving for that, okay? All right, so what's going to get filled in this gap in between here is kind of this formula here, only instead of B's and C's, it's going to be A's and C's, okay? So I'm going to do side A squared, that's the 14 squared, plus side C squared, that's the 12 squared. And if we look at the formula here, we see minus 2. So we're going to do minus 2, and then after the minus 2, it's times side A and times side C gets kind of squeezed in the middle there in front of cosine 92. Okay, you would definitely want to be in degree mode. What you would then do next is you would type into your calculator the entire right-hand side of this formula. There are no variables here at all. You can type all of that in all at once would be great. And when you type that in, roughly it should be 351.73, and that would be equal to b squared. So we would then take the square root of that, and we would get side B, if we carried this out to 2 decimal places, to be roughly 18.75. Okay, so I'm going to take that, I'm going to add that onto the picture here. Now here's the great thing, at least, about law of cosines. You only should have to use it once, okay? Because once you have a strong ratio, and I'm going to circle that strong ratio now, I now know side B and angle B, I can find the other missing parts by doing the law of sines. So I'm going to set up sine of 92 degrees over 18.75. I want to work my way down to finding the next largest angle until the very last one I'm finding is the smallest angle. So we know this. We know that the bigger sides are opposite the larger angles. And again, I did not really draw this picture to scale per se, but the next angle I would want to find would be angle A, because it's opposite the side that's 14 as opposed to angle C is opposite side 12. Okay, now the rest of this hopefully should look and sound familiar. We're going to cross multiply just like we have done before with law of sines. Okay, so I'm cross multiplying here, but notice I'm solving for a missing angle. So that means when I get to the end of this part here, I'm going to have to do the inverse sine in order to break this trig function off of angle A. Okay, so we're going to be typing in inverse sine of 14 sine 92 divided by 18.75, and I believe the angles we are rounding to the nearest degree. This is going to round to 48 degrees. Again, I'm going to add that onto my picture, and look how every step of this problem gets easier and easier and easier, because now I know 2 of the sides in my triangle, so I can subtract off, 2 of the angles in the triangle. I can subtract off those 2 angles, and whatever is left has to be what I'm calling angle C, which would then be 40 degrees. Okay, so again, you only have to do the law of cosines to start the problem, and once you get that very first missing piece, then it kind of gets easier and easier and easier, because you can do the law of sines, and in this case we could just subtract off of 180. Okay, all right, so let's take a look at number 11 here. Okay, number 11 is also another problem that you can tell when you're looking at it, you're not going to be able to start this problem by doing law of sines, and that's because there is no strong ratio to be found. There's no angle and the side opposite that angle that we actually know right now. Okay, so that tells us we have to start by using the law of cosines. Okay, law of cosines. Now again, I'm going to write down generically how that formula looks just so we have it here. Okay, now you can interchange these variables. Okay, now please keep in mind, and I wrote this up above here, that you want to make sure when you're using the law of cosines that you are always finding the very largest side or angle first. Okay, so if this is a side problem, okay, the largest side is the 13 units, so that means the angle that I should be finding first should be angle B. Okay, so again, all the way over here on the right side, I'm going to fill in cosine. I don't know what angle B is though, so I'm leaving that as a capital B. And then all the way on the left-hand side, I'm going to put side B squared. Okay, remember we had said that whatever angle is all the way on the right, that same side gets squared all the way on the left. Okay, what gets filled in the middle are the other 2 sides that you're talking about. Okay, so in this case, it would be side A squared, which is the 7 squared, plus side C squared, that's the 9 squared, minus 2 times the same two sides again. Side A, which is 7, side C, which is 9. Okay, now this is a little bit different than the previous problem. If you look back at the previous problem, remember what we did at the beginning? We were solving for a side. We were allowed on that one, since there were no variables here, we could just type that all into the calculator, do the square root, and that gave us side B. This is going to be a little bit different though. Okay, this one, we're going to have to work to try to get this cosine B by itself. And you're going to have to be very careful with order of operation here. Okay. So let's go ahead. I'm going to combine these two things together. That's going to be 49 plus 81. That's going to combine into 130. Okay, 13 squared is 169. And if I multiply these three numbers together, I get minus 126. Now here is a common mistake that people make. They want to subtract 126 from 130, and you can't do that because this 126 has a cosine B connected to it. These are two separate terms, okay? So they cannot be combined together. Instead, we are now going to get rid of the 130. So we're going to subtract 130 from 169, and that's going to give us 39. And then to get the cosine B by itself, you're going to divide by negative 126 because that's connected by multiplication, okay? Now, I would discourage you from writing down decimals. If you could keep this as a fraction, that would be great. If you want to reduce it, that's fine, or you could leave it just like that. But keep in mind, with the law of sines, when we were solving for an angle, we said we had to do the inverse trig function to get that trig function to break away from the angle. So here's what we need to do for this side here also, is the inverse cosine. That'll give us angle B. Okay, and when we do the inverse cosine, this comes out roughly to 108 degrees. I'm going to add that in here to my picture. And now it looks like, hey, we've got a strong ratio. We know an angle, and we know a side opposite that angle, so we can go ahead and find the next largest angle using law of sines. Okay, it looks like the next largest angle would be angle C, because that's opposite the side that's labeled 9. Okay, and then we're just going to cross multiply here. Okay, so I'm going to cross multiply. Again, we're finding an angle, so when we get to the end here, I'm going to need to do inverse sine of both sides here, and this should give me the measurement of angle C to be 41 degrees. Okay, so I'm going to add 41 degrees back onto the picture. Whoops, that was angle C. Sorry, angle C. Okay, and if I know two of the three sides, then I can just take the two of the three angles. I can just take the two angles I know, subtract those off of 180, and what I'm left with would have to be the remaining angle. Angle A would have to be 31 degrees. Okay, hopefully that's helpful to you. If you guys have further questions, as always, you can reach out and I would be happy to help you guys.